So this PowerPoint will go into detail of how I'm competent in Standard 6, becoming a professional. So Standard 6A is identifying and involving oneself with the early childhood field. So for 6A, this is how I show I'm competent in this. 6A asks for trends, like what are we moving towards? And one big thing that I know we are moving towards is the child development permit. And so I have an understanding of this, as I already have one, and I will be updating mine soon once I get my bachelor's. So I think that a child development permit is so important because it's a wonderful baseline for all of us early educators to have. It's a great standard to set. It's already outlined for all of us. It's great for employers because, it has the structure. It shows how I could go up and what I need to achieve those various levels. Employers I have seen use it for pay scales. And then, so if I wanted to move up on the pay scale, I know how to do that. I know that I need to move from a master teacher to a site supervisor. And another thing I really appreciate about the child development permit is it takes experience into consideration too, because there are teachers out there that might have started this process a while ago. They've been teaching for 20 years and they don't have their bachelor's. So it does take them into consideration as well. And it also shows them that, maybe they only need a few more units to achieve that bachelor's. Which goes into my next point, which is that our field is moving towards everyone needing a bachelor's degree. And this isn't just because of pay or anything like that. I believe it's because if we want to be taken seriously as a profession, I think that we need our bachelor's degrees. Elementary school teachers, that's required along with their teaching credentials. So if we require a bachelor's degree and a child development permit, I really think that's going to set us aside from what we used to be. I believe that we would be taken seriously as a profession. Another component of 6A is knowing my place in the field. I believe that I'm highly involved in the field, not only because I'm, majoring in early childhood education, but because I've worked at various programs. I have continuous conversation with my peers and with coworkers, and I'm going to be doing a mentorship or an internship with a preschool director. So I am moving towards the administrative route. That's my goal. I want to teach other teachers how to teach, and I believe that I can do that most successfully, possibly being a director. Moving on to 6B is knowing about and upholding ethical standards and other early childhood professional guidelines. So with 6B, I know that I'm competent in this because I wanted to highlight some of the laws that I know and use. One thing I know about is the least restrictive environment, and the least restricted environment, is set by the ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act. And in regards to preschool, that's placing a child in their least restricted environment, which means that if they have an IEP and, it calls for services, if they can still be put into a classroom with typically functioning children, we should do that and then just give them the tools to assist them. And I've had children with IEPs in my classroom, and I believe that we were the least restricted environment, and he had an aide that came in with him. So he was able to socialize with his peers and still succeed because he had an aide there. So we were able to put him in that environment. It was really, really great to see. Another law is I know that I am a mandated reporter, and that is a job I do not take lightly. I've had to write reports, as most of us have, and I plan to do that in the future if I need to. We are there for the children, and I know that I need to be there if my duty calls, and I know that that is a huge responsibility I bear as an early childhood educator. I also know that there are guidelines to follow, and the main one that we've learned and talk about quite often is the early learning standards, which of course talks about the California Preschool Learning Foundations and frameworks. This is something I have used to write all of my lesson plans. It's something we use with our DRDPs. I reference them constantly. It's really just a great, seriously, like a great guideline to follow because we are able to use it for all of our children. They might not be reaching a marker, and we know that we can look to the frameworks of lesson plans to get us to that marker. I've also used the early learning standards in Ohio as well, and theirs is a little bit different, but I was able to learn them, and that's how I wrote my lesson plans back in Ohio. And I even, told the parents of where to find that as well, so I connected them to the standards as well. 6C is engaging in continuous collaborative learning to inform practice, using technology effectively with young children, with peers, and as a professional resource. So there are various things that I believe that I'm competent in this area, and one thing is continuous learning. So this standard calls us to continuous learning. So what this means for me personally is I'm getting my bachelor's so that I know that that's not the end of my learning career. Some ways that I can do this is through professional development. Our program is actually looking into possibly trying to get NAEYC accredited. So one way that I can help assist that is by going to the NAEYC conference and learning more about what that entails and how we could bring our program to that standard. Another really fun thing that I just actually participated in, it's at Hancock College. They have half unit courses, which are just on the weekend, but they're so full of information. I've taken the music one and the art one, and I know that there's more in the future, and they're focused on early childhood. So I know that I can take those courses and also get some more college credits if I ever wanted to pursue my master's and start going towards that, but it's also just great information. And lastly, in continuous learning, I know that Brandman has seminars that are very useful and helpful, and they have those constantly. I also know that we need to collaborate. I've collaborated with my directors and coworkers in the past, and will be doing that moving forward as I'm starting this mentorship / internship. Like I've said, I finishing up my degree now, and so I've been usually I'm the youngest student or worker at the program, and I'm the one who's fresh in college, so I have that research and that knowledge, and so I'm able to bring that to the program, and it's really an honor to be able to provide that. And then I'm also an advocate for technology in the classroom, which this standard calls for as well. So what this means is I'm not afraid of technology. Luckily, I'm a young person, and so I'm pretty equipped to handle it. I know how to use it in the classroom, professionally and respectfully with the children, and responsibly as well. So this means I'm not just going to have the iPad out for them to play with whenever. No, I use it for educational tools. I have done trainings on how to use the iPad actually with my coworkers for some of our curriculum as well. 6D is integrating knowledgeable, reflective, and critical perspectives on early education. So something I want to focus on for this one is my use of reflection, of self-reflection. And so what this means is I'm continuously analyzing my teaching methods. I started out my program when I only had 6 units of early education, and it's amazing reflecting on how far I've come from there. One thing that's really influenced in my teaching career is the use of the intentional teaching method. And this was really brought to light actually just recently in the last practicum class when we were looking at Epson's book, and really focusing on what intentional teaching actually meant, and integrating that with the class dimensions guide. And it was really eye-opening because I didn't quite understand that before, and so reflecting on how I could incorporate that into the classroom and going through practicum as a student teacher instead of the lead teacher, it was really great to reflect on how I could better myself. And so I learned a lot about the intentional teaching method that, is really child-led, and we just need to create the environment for them. And I really think that I executed that correctly while I was doing practicum. I was able to have excellent conversations with the children and teach what they were interested in. I also know that this standard calls us to question new and old practices. I'll be honest, I was weary of class at first, the class dimensions guide. I had never used it before. I didn't understand it, but now it's easily become one of my favorite tools. I'm able to help my coworkers use it, and I'm really excited that actually I might be doing a training on how to use it because we don't use it at our program right now. We use Eckers. And so I'm excited to teach them that this is, focused on the teaching, less of the environment and how we can incorporate that into our classroom. I'm also starting to be a little bit questioning the theme-based teaching of like teaching seasons and stuff like that, just based on what the calendar year looks like. Because I'm so into the intentional teaching method, which is child-led as opposed to teacher-led, it's making me question our old methods of the theme-based teaching. So I'm excited to move forward and talk to my director and see how, if that means completely changing the curriculum or just trying to find new ways to spice it up a little bit for the children. And lastly, we look at 6E, which is engaging in informed advocacy for young children and the early childhood profession. So there's just a couple things I want to focus on this because I feel like honestly the rest of these standards really do focus on advocacy. So I wanted to focus on some core areas here, and one is that's really near and dear to my heart is how can we make early education more affordable and available to all children. I know that we have wonderful state-run programs that help with those low-income children, but those get full and we might not have enough in our area. So I'm really trying to think about how private programs can be better about enrolling low-income families and what that looks like, whether that's a scholarship or something else. I'm trying to seek and collaborate with my directors on how we can do that. We are a private program, and I'm trying to figure out how can we create a scholarship fund to help those low-income families get into our program, because what if they can't get into a free program? So I'm just exploring different ways of how we can do that, and I feel like being an advocate means having those conversations and getting the ball rolling on that. I've talked in classes about classes that have nothing to do with early childhood of how every child should be attending a preschool because it is important. It's so important. Those first, 5 to 8 years are just so critical for children. So I believe I'm being an advocate by having those conversations, and hopefully one day I can make a difference in actually implementing policies and procedures to help those children. And here are the sources for some of the stuff that I've talked about, and I am very excited to be graduating soon, and thank you so much for listening.